Thank you, Cathaoirleach. First, I'd like to welcome the Minister to the House. And as someone who has followed somewhat of the career of the Minister, I don't doubt the Minister's credentials. I believe you're a caring, compassionate and an honourable man, as well as a caring and compassionate and honourable politician, and sometimes there's a difference for some. So I want to put that on the record. I understand the difficulties that you've been placed in. I understand it would not be your choice to ram through legislation. We've had two of these similar ram through legislations in recent times, and it is not the way the House should go. But I'm also conscious on both occasions, be it the forestry bill and this bill, that the committee of the Dáil decided not to have legislation, pre-leg scrutiny, and to give consent to this process. And it's disappointing. And so my first appeal would be to the members of parties here and members who sit on the Dáil committee, because it's their prerogative and their decision. But they're not in isolation to the political groupings in this House. And I would ask every member of the Senate that has party representation on that committee to bring it to their attention. Because I don't think it's good for either House that another House, the lower House, decides a process and then inflicts that on us. So we all have, be it independent or parties, we have people there. This particular, I want to talk for a moment just in relation to Amendment 2. This is a particularly difficult one for me. And it's difficult because in some ways it's seen outside of Leinster House to constrain people. And I'm not in the business of closing down anybody. The truth must be told. Justice is hard being fought for by many people. But I'm also conscious of many people who have gone down the route of the Redress scheme, who went before Martin McAleese's work, who went before the Ryan Commission, and how they interfaced with those organisations to tell their unique story, their unique circumstances, and talked about harrowing abuse both within family and outside family, within church organisations and non-church organisations, within the voluntary sector, within the school sector, be it private and public, within Scouts and a whole load of other sporting organisations. And I think there was always going to be difficulties about how you handle those sensitive issues. I myself was in a school in Blackrock, and we know from many people about the harrowing experiences there in relation to a famous swimming instructor, and we read about it regularly, and I don't intend rehearsing it today, other than to say very brave national sports heroes of ours, of this country, were subject to terrible abuse. And they weren't able to come forward for years because they feared the ramifications and the intimidation both within their community and within their family. Many of them only came to terms with this many, many years later through their partners supporting them to come forward. Many, many years too late, when in some cases these people had either moved on from a sports club or a parish or an organisation, or many of them just simply died and were not there. And so victims, survivors, people that went through the harrowing ordeals for many of these people never had their opportunity. So the timing is everything, Minister. And the need to be able to tell your story, and as I said before, more importantly, to be believed. And we know from people who went through the Redress Board, they were sworn to secrecy. It is an offence, passed in legislation, for people to go out and to talk about the redress scheme, how they engaged in that scheme, and the compensation they received. I accompanied a woman to the redress scheme in Clonskee who came from the UK, who had 40 euros in her pocket and eventually was awarded 1,000, 2 or 3 years later, 1,300. No accommodation, no support, nothing. And again, she asked herself, why did I come? I was trying to do something. I was trying to shed a light on something and assist somebody else. So as Senator McDougall set out, the independent commission, within the commission there was this confidential panel, as was known, or confidential committee. I know people and have spoken to people this week who appeared and went on this panel and shared their harrowing stories. I personally told you the other day, the House, that I had grown up in an institution. Well, I had grown up in an institution that also had the famous, terrible vaccine trials. in 1961, 62, 67, 68 and 69, and in 1971, 72 and 73. And you will know, Minister, from the brief and the terms of reference of the judge who is the chair of this case, that they are part of the terms of reference. No one has discussed the vaccine trials. How did they come about? They came about because two brave women in UCD volunteered to give information that was brought to their attention and my attention. And thanks to Kevin Rafter, a very famous journalist in RTE, they ran a series of documentaries on it. And thanks to the librarian at the College of Surgeons in Stephen's Green, we were able at last, having been denied for 20 years, the British Medical Journal reports and journals that set out these vaccine trials. We also learned something of the adverse reaction that impacted on some of those children. We also learned that some of those children died in care, having been subject to vaccine trials. I also heard eloquently here in this House, as someone sitting up in the gallery, when Micheál Martin, then Minister for Health, talked about the terrible ordeal and talked about that he would have, we do like this, we would take random sample of a few institutions. And in that case, of course, they chose Bessborough because it was in Cork, and they chose a place in Galway, and they chose, of course, a number of institutions of which I was involved. That report ultimately never was published. It was challenged in the courts. It was to be appealed by the government and the state, and they failed to appeal it, and was in the end found to be ultra-virus in terms of its definition and its narrow remit, of which we were advised was done on purpose. There was a very famous politician here, Alan Shatter, and an eminent lawyer, who eloquently spoke about the right to bodily integrity of children and how that's enshrined in our Constitution. Up to now, no one has been brought to account. Two of the major people involved are now dead, yet we knew where they were, and they accepted that they were involved in some of these trials. So the point really what I'm making is information is critical. Those two brave women in pharmacology and UCD out in Belfield put into my hand and into a number of politicians' hands in this House critical information, but only on one basis: they would be protected and they would be guaranteed there'll be no traceability back to them. Now, many years later, they're happy, they're both alive. They're happy to go public, but not then. They feared their jobs. They took information from a university in Ireland here to highlight something. So while I am not in the business of suppressing or hiding or protecting anyone, and I'm always conscious of the difficulties that go with that, because perpetrators and people who did bad deeds must always be brought to justice. But I'm also conscious of the fact that now, if it comes to anyone's attention, be they a member of the Oireachtas or a member of the judiciary or any member of the public, there is an onus and a responsibility on them to report it to the appropriate authorities where there is sexual, physical or emotional abuse, or where there's likely to reoccur again, and to assist on Garda Síochána. And you will recall, Minister, when I spoke to you last in the House, I said I look forward to this final report being published and it going clearly to the government and clearly to the Attorney General. And I hope that you will give that commitment. You didn't respond the last time, but within days this report should go to the Garda Commissioner and should be examined in detail, line by line, because there may be a certain line or course that may have to be pursued, and I think that's only right. So we're not hiding anything, and I don't support anyone, but I do recognise, because I know people who have appeared before this panel, that they have brought to this panel highly sensitive information. I'm not going to speculate the type of information they brought. I touched on the drug issue, remember this and recall that, because it's here in the transcript, so you'll recall that. We will have an opportunity in a month or 2 months to have the report, and I look forward to taking that report up in my hand again. And I look forward to teasing all that out again with you. and recalling this very day, of which I am now speaking to you and to the House. So I think ultimately people came forward. I know of childcare workers. I know of tradesmen. I know of gardeners and cooks that were decent, honourable working people who were in communities that worked in these institutions. I know of farm helpers in Tuam who reported difficulties in relation to Tuam. And when you look at Catherine Corliss, and again, that was part of the remit in Tuam, it took brave and courageous people in that community to say enough is enough. Times have moved on. I had two men in here last year who both came from Tuam. And it so happened one of them was their birthday, and it's always nice to tell a story, but I didn't know it at the time. But I said, come on, I always welcome people to this house because this is the people's house. This is our house, the nation's house. And we had our meeting, and they talked about the great difficulties they had and the hurt and the disappointment and the setbacks. And the one thing they kept saying was about being believed. So important, you know, when you tell your story that I believed. And I said, come up and have something to eat and have a pint. They were thrilled. This was their house. This is your house. And one of them said, it's my birthday today, and I want to thank the catering staff because they went away and came with one muffin and a candle. And we laughed and we cried. And he cried. And he talked about his first birthday cake. And some of the staff that are listening here today will know because they were there. And we laughed and we cried. And we talked, what a human thing. We all need to be loved. We all need affirmation. We all need support. We all need encouragement. And remember, Minister, when we're talking about people, and many of them outside the gates here today, and thousands of them have written to us, they want to be believed and they want to be supported. Cherish the children of the nation equally and support them. So much happened to these people. They were entrusted to the care of the state or to the church or to a charity or whatever. Many of them were taken away from their families. And I spoke the other day, it's not all the single mother at 16 to 19 with one child. There were mothers and fathers who were married in this state who had their children wrenched away from them and were not supported. There were mothers and fathers and children that were split because of other families' interest in money and inheritance and land and all the historic things that go with our obsession with owning and our obsession with property and inheritance. So it's too simplistic to say it's a boy or a girl, it's a split family. It's not. There are many, many families that were gone. We know many of these children were kept in homes. I tell of a story of a man that came to see me only a few weeks ago, and his mother left him in care. She went away and she got married, and she came back some years later having talked to her partner and said, let's go back and take that little boy out. He's yours, he's ours. What a lovely thing to do. And I want to support you in it. And arriving to the institution in question here in Dublin and being told he was adopted. Many, many years rolled on, and it's a strange coincidence because we only live in a village, it's a global village really, and he stumbled on his mother through a different set of circumstances. And it was an unusual name, and I suppose that's what helped. And his mother she said, but I have a letter here, and I can produce it. She produced it. And it said that he was adopted. When she asked, could she go and see him, he said, no, you'd be disturbing the child. He's settled now, leave him alone. She was robbed by this state, by establishments in this state, of that opportunity of reunification. And she's the evidence. She has the evidence. Where's the support for her? So I think behind it, we all have a story to tell about our own lives, our own families. We have our own experiences with all of this. But the one thing I can say, having lived through this experience and tried to be as positive as I can, it has politicised me. It has made me aware of the disadvantage of other people, the injustice. I am on fire at times when I see injustice around me, where I don't see fair play. And we need to remember that the people we're talking are getting older. 30 years, I'll be nearly 90. I won't be around hawking around for my information. Loads of others are gone. They're broken. Many of these people's spirits are broken by a wall, the state, the church. Not all. Good people in the church, good people in the state, and I want to acknowledge that. But many people have had this wall up against them and they can't get this information. So, Minister, what you're proposing to do, and let's keep the messages here very simple, because the reality is for many people, they see you as the Minister locking up all their documentation for 30 years. They see you and your bill blocking access to information in relation to certain information and evidence and documentation which has been collected by the Commission of Investigation into the deaths of children, of mothers, of people that had terrible, terrible experiences. And so I think it's important that where staff came to the confidential panel or confidential committee and said, I can bring you to Tuam, I knew what happened. Or to the man that told the woman in Galway, don't worry, I tried to give your child a good burial. The nuns sent me away with your child in a wheelbarrow, and rather than incinerate it, and this is out in Salt Hill in Galway, I buried it beneath the compost heap. That's a true story. How did I learn that story? A woman that I know, who was a neighbour of mine, who told me she was 80 years of age and she was feeling troubled. She was beginning to lose her memory. She had never talked about this case to her 3 daughters, but her son, her only son, who she was denied to take in her hands and hold for a few minutes, was given to a gardener to be put in a wheelbarrow, to be brought to be burnt. But that gardener came forward through one of the nuns and told the story. So there are cases where people come and bring stories to assist. And I don't believe, knowing of the reputation of the judge in question here and of her work, I believe that she will give us a comprehensive report. I would have no doubt that she'd be conscious of how the information that came to the confidential panel came about. I'm no doubt about that. She would know how this confidential information came, and she may replicate certain amounts of that in our report. But as Senator Michael McDougall has said, and I have looked at the documentation that was sent out inviting people, and I know people who engaged, they went into a system to tell a story, to assist the Commission. And in those cases, their confidentiality needs to be protected because they will have done a great service. And at the end of the day, the state has empowered a judge to carry out an independent commission with huge powers, and I think that will be reflected in it. So finally, Minister, I'm saying this one is a difficult one for me, but on balance, and that word seems to be used an awful lot, particularly in the coalition government, it's a word I've been becoming to use myself. Everything is about being pragmatic and everything is about balance, and on balance, it's the right thing to do. To support in that amendment is the right thing to do, and that took a long time for me to get my head around. I want to be honest, didn't come easy, but I think on balance, having spoken, having had shared conversations with people, I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm happy to put my name to it, and I'm happy to support it. And I hope, Minister, you will come some way to understanding what I'm saying in relation to this matter. Thank you.